Good. Would you like me to pull up the agenda or
Sure.
should I start the presentation?
If you want to pull it up real quick, we can do that, and then I can do a brief intro, and then we just have to approve the minutes, and then
Oh,
we'll
right.
pass it over.
Version.
All right,
Yeah.
welcome everybody. Welcome to our third swag of the year. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much to Al and Mariah and Mason, Peter for the tour of the reservoir. Really appreciate that. We only have about an hour left for this part of the meeting, so I just want to move quickly into that. But before we do that, I thought it might be helpful just to introduce who is in the room. So, and then we can go to who's online. I'll start. My name is Andrea Amico. I'm a Portsmouth resident and I co-chair the swag.
I'm Mariah Habershaw. I'm a water quality specialist for the city of Portsmouth.
Hi, I'm Jim Hewitt, Portsmouth resident and planning board.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Barrett. I am a school board member.
I'm Vince Lombardi as city councilor.
Peter Rice, Director of Public Works.
Hello, Rich Blaylock, city councilor.
Mason Caceres, Assistant Water Resource Manager.
Rich Stevens-Timo, Portsmouth resident.
Shan Sedema, Portsmouth resident.
Al Pratt, Water Resource Manager for the city.
Stephanie Secord, Public Information Officer. Let's take her.
Do we have anyone?
Okay. So, before we start, do you have a passcode? So I didn't get it, I'm logging in. So. He else is gonna be able to get in.
Is there a task code on
I
there?
was looking, I thought it was the 638.
That's what I have no.
Is there one on the left, says Zoom Workplace, to the left side? Where the login to Zoom.
Yeah.
Just so.
There's this.
Just like right there.
Yeah, indeed.
Just.
With the three.
Yeah.
I'll let you do it.
You're gonna be able to do that.
I
I
thought
think the password is
FIT
probably 638367 based on the call-in number.
Yeah, I tried that. Try it again.
So,
Or do you have to do
I
a
can
star?
try.
Do you have to do a star first? Okay.
8839, 837 number.
this right here.
It's with pound,
The middle.
middle one that ends in pound.
Just
Sure,
above
that's
that.
good.
So it's
While we try that, we also need to approve our minutes from the last meeting in June. So we just need a motion to do that. Anyone like to make a motion?
Just.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, great. Is everyone in favor of approving the June meeting minutes?
Yes.
Is anyone opposed to doing that?
I'll abstain, I wasn't here.
I was
Thank you. Right, sounds like there's no one opposing, so we'll go ahead and approve those minutes. And then we'll turn it over to Al. We have some presentations from Al, Mariah, and Mason, and then switch it over to Q&A at the end.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure. Everybody's online.
Like the top for more to get the passcode too.
Yeah, it's fine.
Potentially. I figure out, I just tried a bunch of them and they're not. Or in the file, is there a file option for Zoom?
As a community, invited go.
Copy invite
So,
link.
yeah, go back to the invite link. Right,
It's that someplace.
Try to do it in the minutes.
Put it in chat, then I can copy the.
Whole presentation right here. It's taking way too long. It's interesting.
Some the Burns account.
Go back to the slideshow on the bottom, you can click in the notes,
Oh, yeah.
tap that notes, try it there.
There we go, passcode
280.
280-277. But nobody's gonna have that, right? So nobody will be able to log in.
Well, if, once I get in there and can see if anybody's signed. in.
So,
Ask them.
anyway, we should start here.
Yeah.
Time's ticking. Okay, so we're sharing this right now. Let me begin. Slideshow, okay. So we've been to the reservoir, thanks for all that, it's limited what we can see up there, but there's your reservoir, that's where a lot of the water that serves Portsmouth comes from. So, we've done that, I'm gonna go, this is just the agenda for today, so I'm starting to, I'll talk about the reservoir watershed, give a general overview of the reservoir and what we're doing to manage and monitor the reservoir. Then I'll turn it over to Mariah, who will talk about cyanobacteria and the work we've been doing with that recently. Then I'll talk a little bit about water supply update, like Brian used to do, just general conditions of the system. Then Mason will cover some of the lead sampling work and our service line inventory project. And then finished up with PFAS. I had this somehow.
More. Then have a video again,
Video panel.
floating meeting.
Oh. All right. All right, so the Bellamy Reservoir, I gave you a little synopsis of at the reservoir, when it was built and all. Just to put it into some context, so 66% on average of the water that's served to the Portsmouth water system comes from the reservoir. Critical asset for the city as the management of the surface water. 34% of the water is from the Greenland well, Portsmouth well, and Collins well. This is just the Portsmouth system, talking about it separately from the Peace system. But still a very significant portion of the water is coming from the reservoir. Here's an aerial shot of the reservoir. Just wanted to make note, we were down by the dam on the southeast corner. The reservoir is it's an old stream channel, right? And the Army Corps put the dam in down there and flooded all the wetlands and the little lying areas up through there. Just want to make a note here that there's two major tributaries, the Malago Brook in the north, comes from the northwest, and the Bellamy River that comes straight from the west. I'll show you the watershed in a minute, but the reservoir is primarily in Madbury. There's a little portion up here that's in Dover. But the majority of the watershed extends into.
Should we go back to that last slide?
Yeah.
I always wondered that turquoise water, is that an old gravel pit? Is that an
It is.
active gravel pit?
Yes. As far as a few years ago, it was still active. I'm not sure how active it is now.
All right, do they dredge material from that pond?
Yeah.
Wow.
whichever, I never thought it was legal, but I talked to somebody from the state and said we didn't want to do that.
And it's still,
Because there's no out water flowing out of there. So,
okay. Obviously a huge standing gravel deposit. And is Dover having wells nearby?
I believe they do. They have some wells over here. And I thought they had some down here, I'm not exactly sure. Yep,
Interesting, all right.
Dover's well aware of it too, but it's
Great, thanks.
good to know that, pretty glaring, you know, is that.
You don't see that color water too often.
General stats of the reservoir is about 400 acres total, maximum depth around 28 feet at the dam, but it's generally a fairly shallow reservoir. On average, it's only about 10 feet deep. Full volumes, 730 million gallons approximately, based on some bathymetry that was done back in the early 2000s. One thing that I did want to note here, though, is being a relatively small reservoir, given the size of the watershed. It's a 22 square mile watershed. So that's a lot of water going through a small water body. So we do get some flashiness during big storms coming up soon. It's been dry recently. So when we start getting rain, our water quality is going to start seeing that. The reservoir on average flushes about 8 times a year, which a lot of ponds around here, it's like it flushes every year, 2 years. It might be refreshed with new water. But the Bellamy refreshes 9 times a year on average. So water's constantly flowing through there. If something does happen with seasonal fluctuations, we can be assured within another month or two, it's going to pass through. So that's just a point that I wanted to make there, as well as the fact that our watershed is extremely important. What happens in watershed? So as you see, the watershed does extend way into Barrington. It includes Swains Lake. And this whole area here is Barrington. Developed areas along Route 125. There's some developed areas around Swains Lake. Otherwise, it's fairly rural development throughout. Another point I want to make here is Bellamy River winds through this massive wetland area here. So we do see part of the water quality in the reservoir is affected by this wetland. And we have dry conditions in the summer, and we're going to get our rain coming up soon. All those dried and areas in the wetlands that hasn't experienced water lately, all of a sudden we'll experience water, and we're going to get some iron, manganese, and a lot of organic loading from the wetland. Just something that we know that happens, and we just have to adjust our treatment processes here. Land protection in the watershed. There's a Tamposi lot over here that extends into the Bellamy watershed. There's some portions up here that are protected, but I just want you to make note of the land that is protected one way or other around the reservoir. And I'll get into more of that a little further on in the presentation.
Excuse me now, just one thing. Sorry, but get back to that last line.
Yeah.
That light green area to the north of the reservoir, is that Dover's Tolan Road landfill?
Our landfill is right. Get my arrow there. Yeah, it may extend into that. It's sort of this area right here. Actually, no, because it's partially, this is a watershed divide, and much of the landfill is outside of the watershed, so I can't see the roads on here very clearly, but I think Toll Road is up here.
I thought it was towards the peninsula.
Wait, here's Chico.
So that if you see the Route 9 goes across, and then I thought it was that right there is where I thought the landfill was.
You'd be right. Here. Yeah, it's probably right in here.
So I was just curious because it's a different shade of green. I didn't know if that was highlighted for a reason.
I think that's just a result of the shading, because some of these are under easement, some of these have easements on them, some of them are just owned by Dover, I believe, so. But this whole area, I have another slide that kind of shows that breakdown. So they own the landfill as well as the property all the way up to the reservoir over there.
So I guess the question, looks like the watershed line is right near the Tolan Road landfill. So would you say the Tolan Road landfill is in the Bellamy River watershed?
The groundwater area around it is, I don't know, I haven't looked at the footprint. I think the footprint probably extends through. But I know there's a lot of studies on this. I know back in 2023, was it March 23, when we had a SWAG meeting, representatives from Dover and their consultants did a whole presentation on the landfill. So that's recorded and has a lot of great information about what's going on up there and what their extraction and treatment processes are. And that project is still ongoing, so. Yeah. Yeah, it's a concern, we know it's up there. And there may be some other maps coming up that might answer that question too. But quickly, I'm gonna blast through all these things just to show you all the stuff that we do in the reservoir. And I want to make sure we have enough time for my listen here too. So I'll just go through each of these sort of topic items of things that we're doing. So outreach, we have signs around the reservoir, all these points of entry where boats have access to, and people can find trails. We have signs, various signs for different places, public water supply, carry in, carry out type of signs. No restricted use signs. We've sent flyers out to abutters of the reservoir in the past. We're due to do that again pretty soon to tell them what they can and can't do on the property around the reservoir. We have signs 2,000 feet away from the dam. There's a state rule that people are not allowed in that area. It's for safety because it's close to the dam and all people falling in the ice by the dam, but also because the intakes are right there. We have these floating signs up there. All this text on this sign on the right is required that we post that. That's the state rules for this water body. But there's a whole myriad of, like we talked about, no bathing, no swimming, no fuel powered motorboats, no cutting along the shoreline, many restrictions on the property. Another thing we do is shoreline surveys once a year. It's been great to have interns help with this. This year Mariah did it, last year Mason Mariah did it. So every year we go take a boat around the shoreline to take a look for debris, any new campsites, any signs that people have been out there, trees that fall in the water, any kind of activities that we need to know about, report, and maybe put more signs up, take care of. We do an annual cleanup. Usually we try to align this with Earth Day. To clean up the launch areas as well as the Route 9 causeway here is always loaded with trash. It's amazing how much stuff flies out of people's cars. So we do that work. Now this next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about land property ownership. So this gets into a little who owns what. So this hatch line is owned by the city of Portsmouth. Portsmouth owns the reservoir. We pay taxes on the reservoir space. There's one mistake in here. This is actually Dover. This little sign, this little slip right here is actually Dover property. Otherwise, this is owned by the city. On top of that are the easements that were put in place by the Army Corps of Engineers back when it was built. Premise behind this, so it's called flowage easement. So if the water level flows over the dam, there's sort of elevation associated with that. This represents the areas that would be flooded by that. So basically, there's no structures allowed in this area, no animal pens or anything allowed in this area. So there's some restrictions in this close area to the reservoir. Then town owned properties around there. So yeah, so town of Madbury owns a few properties here that are, this one is an easement. I don't know about this one. And then Dover owns most of this property over here. So back in 2016, I believe it was, when I started looking at protecting land. So I had some background working for Bear Paw Regional Greenways way back when. So when I came to the city, I had this conservation in the back of my mind. When we have some conservation easements, how can we get more protection around the reservoir? So I put together a methodology to help prioritize the properties around the reservoir. Being the case that around the reservoir, that's the most important place we're going to protect first. Sure, we could do this study all the way up the tributaries too, because there's a lot of land that we have to protect. But the property that would have the most impact to the reservoir are these properties right around the reservoir. And I put together a ranking scheme for those. So looked at like property size, how much shoreline it had, how close it was to the intake, how much wetland was on the property, how really developable it was, like with road frontage and such. And put together criteria to kind of score all the significant properties that weren't already developed around the reservoir. And came up with this system, the scoring system. This was at the time when we were looking at this property right here, David Olson, the owner of this property, was very interested in putting his land into easement. So I wanted to somehow justify that this property was valued compared to all these other lots. How much money should we really invest in this property if there's other properties out there that we should be looking at? And it did come out as a high value property, it has frontage, it has overlook, so it's highly developable property. So we proceeded with the easement on that property. Flash forward here to today, where we have an easement, 71 acres of the Olson easement. We have 107 acres on Duffy easement. And we are currently working on this Fernald easement property over here. That was deemed to be highly developable because it has 2 road frontages along Newton Road as well as Mill Hook Road. And it is all very high and dry land, so it could have been house lots. Thankfully, the owner was very interested in putting it into easement because her father loved this land and took care of this land for so long. So it was a great match, and we were able to request grant funds from the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund, similar to what we did for the other 2 properties. And we also requested funds from this congressionally directed spending through Gene Shaheen's office, and we have been awarded both of those. Still in process, but we're hoping to close on that property by the end of this year. It's been a long process. It's not easy to go through the easement process until the end. But anyway, so that's what we have right now. There's been some other properties that have come and gone that we've kind of gone after, done some appraisals, but we either haven't been able to move fast enough, or the property owners just weren't really interested in easements. They just wanted money. So we continue to look for opportunities though, and I think this needs to extend into the reservoir. There's a lot of undeveloped land up there that could be of good value for protection of the reservoir. With the easements comes monitoring, especially with the grant funds. We're required to monitor these easements every year. So Mariah and Mason go out there, sometimes with an intern, and make note of anything that's happening, similar to what we do for a shoreline survey. We have to do for each of these easements, put a report together and send it to the state for their training. Okay, next thing we do is all the monitoring of the reservoir. So we have 2 main sites in the reservoir where we do bi-weekly at least monitoring in the summertime. Then we have these 4 other points, one from Malago Brook, one from on the Bellamy River. We have a site before that large wetland to get kind of before and after the wetland take on the water quality and how it changes. And then we have an outlet from Swains Lake. So these are bi-weekly in the summertime. And we analyze for a number of things. Here's the list of things on the left is what we monitor from the reservoir from the samples. On the right is what we're monitoring right at the plant coming out of the reservoir. Some of those we do daily, some of them weekly, some of them monthly, some of them quarterly. Depending on PFAS is a quarterly sample in both cases. Total organic carbon is a monthly. A lot of the others are either daily or weekly. So a lot of monitoring going on. And Mariah will talk a little bit more about the monitoring program, especially how cyanobacteria is our new thing. That second. So this is just a summary of what you saw at the reservoir. Actually, it's the same diagram you saw at the reservoir of the aeration system that we have up there. That's part of our management program to manage the water quality before we I like to think of this as our preconditioning of the water before it comes to the treatment plant, or pre-treatment sort of in a way. And at that, I will turn it over to Mariah to talk about cyanobacteria, which really, I hate to say it like this, but it is another emergent contaminant like PFAS was. Different, but we still need to consider it as an emergent contaminant with warming waters that we're seeing. There's more prevalence of algal growth, and so doing something to keep on top of it. So turn it over.
Yeah, so I'm here to just talk about our experience with cyanobacteria in the last few years, and what we're doing about it currently and in the future as well. So I'll just be brief and try to save the questions for the end since we're low on time here. So what is cyanobacteria? I think is a big question. Is it algae? Is it bacteria? I think formally and commonly it's referred to as blue-green algae, but it's not quite an algae and it's not quite a bacteria. About 3.2 billion years ago, it broke off from the bacteria and it's been around for that long. But it's considered like a bacteria because it, it lacks a nucleus, but it's like algae because it uses photosynthesis. So that's why it's kind of hard to define. It is one of the most numerous taxa to ever existed on Earth and one of the first organisms to ever produce oxygen as well. I think an important thing to note, and I'm sorry this slide got a little messed up, is that it's natural and unharmful until the bloom starts producing cyanotoxins. So there are conditions that enhance cyanobacteria bloom growth, and this is why we've been seeing it more and more over the years. I'm sure you all have heard about it more in the last couple of years than ever before. And this could be due to more monitoring, but as well as these conditions that are just proliferating it. So extended periods of direct sunlight can cause blooms. This is why we see it more in the summertime. Higher levels of nitrogen and phosphorus from runoff of failing septics, pesticides, and fertilizers as well. They thrive in stagnant water. They actually thrive on low dissolved oxygen conditions too, although they do eat up the oxygen in the water as well. And they move with the wind too. So increased precipitation in the last few years and then changes in climate causing more droughts too can lead to more cyanobacteria blooms. And DES said that since 2002, they've been seeing just an excess of cyanobacteria blooms here in New Hampshire. So this is just a cool graphic that I really love to show because on the left side, these are not cyanobacteria blooms. This is algae and plants. On the right side, these are examples of cyanobacteria. So I think some people see algae in the water, like common ones, I believe dillweed is what it's called. And they're like, oh, it's cyanobacteria, but it's not. I think these are great examples of cyanobacteria and how to tell the difference. But one of the big things is color and smell too. So cyanobacteria blooms will have like a fishy, distinct kind of gasoline smell. And then there'll be kind of like this color scheme as you see on the right side, whereas algae will be more brownish green. So cyanobacteria, like I said, are unharmful and natural until they start producing cyanotoxins. And that's what we're worried about here, of course. So there are no regulations on cyanobacteria as of right now. There are some health advisory that the EPA put on only 2 types of cyanotoxins. So cylindrospermocin and microcystins. And you can see those levels there. They're both capable to be produced by, and this is blocking it, so I might actually just minimize this here. So these are all the different types of cyanobacteria that can produce these 4 types of cyanotoxins, most commonly being microcystins. So they can be harmful to pets, livestock, wildlife, and people, and they can also create taste and odor problems.
Can I add to that a little bit later?
Sure, yeah,
Public health perspective.
of course.
There are other issues related to cyanotoxin that are possible. And one of the issues in looking at right now, people are looking at ALS. This should be association between exposure to cyanotoxins and ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah.
So that's a public health problem potentially. Plus, there's other skin issues and other kinds of respiratory problems that can. The other problem associated with it right now is that I sent Dr. Chan, the state epidemiologist, an email the other day. And I asked him some information about ALS particularly. And I asked him about the incidence rate of ALS in New Hampshire and some other issues relative to risk factors associated. And the answer I got back is they collect no data on ALS in New Hampshire.
Can I just speak to that briefly?
What's that?
When I was at UNH in 2016, they had started to undertake a study and start to look at how baboons were attacking each other in areas where there was cyanobacteria. And they started back then linking it to ALS and doing studies too.
Some
So I
states
do
have,
think that UNH is doing.
some states have registries, ALS registries.
Yeah,
New Hampshire does not have the only northern New England state without an ALS registry. The issue, of course, if you don't collect any data, you have no information. If you can't get information, you can't interview cases where family members see what their risk factors were, both occupationally, recreationally, et cetera, et cetera. Which is from me, a public health negligence, if you will. So I'm working with a representative fund out of Merrimack. And she's proposing legislation, because there is a statute on the books. You don't need legislation actually to make ALS a reportable condition. There's a RSA 141A, which is the Critical Health Events Reporting Act, which could be added by a rule. You could add ALS by rule to the Critical Health Reporting Act. And then once it's reported by physicians, et cetera, then you can develop a questionnaire and follow up with cases and find out some more information about what's happening with ALS in New Hampshire in terms of risk factors and so forth. So that's a big open question right now about what ALS is going to mean. So this might be updated in the future because it's going to have, I think, much more public health significance.
Well, I'm sure.
Once we start getting more information.
Yeah, the conversation around cyanobacteria is growing just as much as PFAS to being an emerging contaminant. I think we're gonna learn so much more in the next coming years,
Yeah.
and us as a municipality, we're trying to get on top of it right now.
So hopefully if something happens in the next year, so at least we'll begin maybe to start collecting data like we did with cancer back in
Relating it to-
1987, we started a cancer registry. Because we knew nothing about what was happening with cancer except mortality. And we don't even know mortality in New Hampshire on ALS unless you go back and look at all the death certificates. But there's nothing reportable, no
Yeah.
data collected at all in New Hampshire now on the state level on ALS and its relationship potentially to cyanide.
Well, I'd be interested to see how that turns out. We'll keep track of it too. And there's a whole slew of health effects related to cyanotoxins too. But you know, this is what cyanobacteria is and what it can cause. So I just wanted to go through what we've seen so far in the last few years and what we plan to do about it and what we're currently doing about it. So I'm first going to just talk about our experiences with it in the last 2 years. This is actually beginning in 2019. We started monitoring for it until now as well, but we've only seen it in 2023 and this year as well. And then I'll go into more about how we're monitoring for it and what our response is too. So in 2023, I believe it was July, maybe June. Yeah, July of 2023, we started seeing a small cyanobacteria bloom accumulating near the dam. It was that bluish green color. Immediately we notified DES because we weren't sure what the next steps would be. So they had us collect samples for enumeration to do the cell count on the cyanobacteria and cyanotoxin testing on the day of the initial sighting. We were able to identify it as the species Dolichiospermum, formerly known as Anabina, and the state actually confirmed this as well. So the results of those tests from the state, we had 22,000 cells per milliliter of cyanobacteria in the raw water, so coming into the plant here. The recreational advisory limit is set at 70,000. So this is a very small bloom. And our cyanotoxin testing came as non-detect in the raw water. That was testing for microcystins, cylindrospermopsin, anatoxins, and saxitoxins. So a good number of different types of cyanotoxins.
Just a quick correction.
Yeah.
Like the 22,000 cells per milliliter was actually straight from the surface skin.
That's right.
Yeah, it wasn't actively coming into the plant at that quantity.
Yeah, so very
So that
concentrated.
Worst case, it was at 22,000 cells.
Yeah. Thank you. And then, so that's the case for 2023. I'll talk more about what we did, and as you see, we saw no detections in the raw water, so we were not concerned. So in 2024, we started seeing the pea soup looking cyanobacteria in the reservoir, not near the dam, and also show some images as well afterwards. So this began to accumulate near the intake, but not directly in front of it. Again, with the suggestion of DES, and we're working with a consultant firm, GZA. We collected samples from the 6-foot depth, which is right in front of that raw water intake at the dam, the finished water here at the plant, and the raw water here at the plant too, for cyanotoxin testing, and we sent it overnight to an accredited lab. and those results came back as non-detect. So these two instances, we were lucky to spot it very quickly, and we acted quickly too, and we had no detections in the raw water. And I believe the results of the cyanotoxin testing is for this year was raw water and finished water. So Dolichiospermum anabina is the species that we've seen here. These are some images when we started noticing it. Not super prevalent, but you can start to see the green tint in the water. And this is a blend of both years because it looks very similar. So you can kind of see some green in the leaves there, a little bit of streakiness, some mixture of pollen and other material there as well on top. But if you're looking from a certain when the sun's hitting the water, it's a little harder to see. So we get a good viewpoint from our pontoon boat out there, and we get a little bit closer. So these are just different images of it, kind of close to the dam there, a little bit cloudiness. This is what it looks like a little bit closer. This is the pea soup that I was talking about. And then when it starts to clump together in a Petri dish, and a little bit closer in a microscope. So these are different clusters of that Dolichiospermum under the microscope. So kind of getting back into like how we saw this, how do we know, and how can you be confident that we're paying attention to it? So every single day, our operators are out there getting down close to the water, doing daily visual observations. On top of that, weekly, I'm in the reservoir taking samples, measuring the levels of phycocyanin, which is a direct tie to freshwater cyanobacteria. It's the blue-green pigment found in freshwater cyanobacteria, as well as chlorophyll, which is the granny green pigment in plants and algae. And both of these can give us an estimation of how much algae is present there. And we are also, in the summer months, we are collecting samples measuring phycocyanin and chlorophyll in the raw water. If we see any, anything above 0 in the raw water here at the plant for phycocyanin, we check the DAF in the filter as well. We've never seen phycocyanin in the filters. We are also conducting microscope identification here at the plant on a weekly basis. And we also have biweekly monitoring with GZA, the consultants that I mentioned before, as well as biweekly tributary monitoring too. So GZA is an environmental consultant that we're working with. They received a grant from DES and EPA for $86,903. They're using us as a case study to address cyanobacteria in drinking water and to come up with a monitoring and response plan. So they come and work with us every 2 weeks and sample for ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite, total phosphorus, which are directly tied to these nutrients can cause in excess cyanobacteria blooms. They also do a plankton count, identification, and pigment testing. That's the phycocyanin and chlorophyll. And in the case of the bloom, they will conduct the cyanotoxic testing for us at doing collections from that 6-foot depth in front of the intake, raw water at the plant, and our finished water too. That monitoring response plan is expected to be completed by March of 2025. So before next summer and before we have any issues with cyanobacteria again. So I'll talk a lot about our DAF system, or dissolved air flotation system. So we have a benefit in having that because most toxin-forming cyanobacteria, especially Dolichiospermum, float to the surface. And therefore the DAF system is effective because it skims the surface scum off. Coagulation and flocculation also help because it helps bind the cyanobacteria to the floc in order to be skimmed off prior to any treatment is added, which could cause cell damage. So our operational response to cyanobacteria blooms as of right now is to activate the diffuser in front of the intake, which will disperse the bloom away from the raw water intake, reduce our plant's flow, reduce the surface water flow, and blend the water with well water. And then we turn on and introduce powdered activated carbon, and that absorbs any possible cyanotoxins that could be in the water. Increase our backwash frequency of the filters, and then continue to test for phycocyanin at the raw depth and filtered water taps. Just wanted to add this last bit in here. It's pretty cool to see if you're really interested in cyanobacteria. The state is monitoring, and they do a lot of citizen science towards this. So if you ever see a bloom, you can report it yourself, take pictures and get as much information as possible. Any body of water, whether it's a pond, a river, a puddle, anything like that. So this is, they're monitoring fecal bacteria, but cyanobacteria warnings and watches too. This is updated as of yesterday. So these are the current watches and warnings right now in the state of New Hampshire. And I'll show you what some of it looks like. So Tuftonboro, Lake Winnipesaukee on the left there, that is the same species that we have here or had seen here at 561,000 cells per milliliter. That's a mix with a little bit of pollen, so you'll get that yellow tint too. I think the most notable is that middle picture at Dennis Pond in Northwood. That's about 1 million cells per milliliter. So that blue color is pretty intense there. Also Dolichospermum. And then the last one is Planktothrix in Emerson Pond, a more accumulated plant-like matter there. But that is all I have. Thank you for listening.
Sure.
It seems like you, I mean, on one of your sides, you're talking about cyanobacteria and more stagnant water. Obviously, a lot of the water here seems to be sitting in stagnant, given that nobody's been swimming in it and whatnot. Is there any idea of like moving the water or, you know, I don't know how you would go about doing that for the whole reservoir, but is there any idea that something like that would, you know, in the future, if this continues to become an issue even more so,
Yeah, I
like
think,
a water flow type
sure.
situation?
I think Al mentioned that the reservoir refills, it flushes itself out 9 times a year. So we do have quite a lot of flow, and we're figuring out ways to push the water over the dam when it's not flowing. We've used a pump in the past. But the water in the reservoir is flowing, it's just when it gets caught in certain little pockets.
Okay, and those are the pockets you're finding the cyanobacteria?
Okay, yeah, and it moves very quickly, we've never had a bloom longer than a few days.
Some hold questions and just
Okay,
Alright,
through the material, and then we could do questions at the end.
Yeah,
just
I don't
to be
know
interested.
how much of this I should go
Yeah.
through. I'll try to go through this quickly, just sort of the background stuff here. Conditions of the water supply right now, pretty quickly, we're not in a drought anymore. We were in for a little while. Now we're just back into abnormally dry conditions, like cooler weather and rain in August. Knocked us back to abnormally dry, and so we're looking better, but here's our precipitation over the past year. Since March, we've been below average. The red lines are this year, the blue lines here are median precipitation by month. We had some wet months earlier in the year, but it's been relatively dry since. I suspect for the next month or so, we're gonna start getting rain, but we see that at the reservoir, how we were in pretty good shape. Water was still flowing over the dam through July, and August came. Things dried up and the water level of the reservoir dropped below the spillway. This is relative to our 2016 drought and our 2020 drought, 2022 drought. Not overly concerned, given it's this time of year, there's no need to put any kind of water restrictions on. These other years, things started in June or July, we really started seeing a drop in the water levels. Groundwater levels have dropped down over the summer as expected. You see the tail end here this summer, the water table in much of our wells has dropped down, but still well within sort of our historic range, especially if you consider some of the older water levels in the past. So our wells have held up well, and this typically what we do is we rest our wells in the fall and the winter, so we won't be pumping quite so hard out of the wells. Once it starts raining, the reservoir water is high quality. We'll start using more reservoir surface water and let the recharge from the fall rain recharge the aquifers, so we'll be ready to go for next summer with recharged groundwater. This is just, this is through Q2, so this just went through past June. I don't have this quarter's data yet. It's just a way to look at what our production is in Portsmouth supplies versus the Pease supplies relative to what our capacity of all those sources are. So our capacity of all of our sources is around 7 million for the Portsmouth system. We've been using about 3.5 in Q2, so we still have plenty of supply available. Looking at water production, so again, blue is our average, 10-year average water production by month. The orange is the monthly water production, which over the whole year, except for this July when it was hot and dry, we ended up using more water than our 10-year average. Otherwise, we've been using less water month to month than we have the past 10 years on average. Projects, quickly go through some of the bigger projects we have going on. This, I think Ryan mentioned last time about the transmission main and how the status of that. We've installed the 2 insertion valves, tapped the main on both sides, so we are prepared to install the 3rd line for that. But our next steps are finalizing the permitting with the state. We're still waiting to hear back from the state on some of the techniques we were going to propose for the turbidity controls. We'll put it up for rebid and see what the prices come back at, and then it'll be a reconsidering whether we have the funds to do it and further discussions of when and where and how. So that's outstanding. This is the one I mentioned earlier too about these. So there's air relief valves along the transmission main. Every place there's a high point in the transmission main. There's these air relief valves, and what we found recently in August, one of those valves blew right out of the pipe. There's a metal fitting right in the transmission main that rusted out. So this is the first one that happened, but it tells us if it happened here, it will likely happen elsewhere. So we need to be prepared for that. So I see this as being, this is going to be an ongoing project. I can see this going on for the next 10 years, really. There's 27. 27, and now one's gone. This one will be replaced. They're filling this hole tomorrow, putting a new manhole over it. And getting the design together, but this is basically about be our template of what we'll follow when we go to all the other ones and replace those. So it's a big project. Our first step is clearing our easement. There's a lot of trees that grow up over the easement for years and years, so we need to clear that and make sure we have access to all these points. That's a project that's coming down the line. Another project is our water storage tanks. We are just finishing up a study on the Lafayette tank, the Constitution tank, to look at options. Whether we repaint it, refurbish it, build a new tank. So those options are all on the table, but before we make a decision about the Lafayette tank, we really need to know what to do with the Spinney Road tank and the Newington Booster tank, because they both need attention to. They're all getting older, they need paint jobs, and they need some rehab. So we're proceeding with an engineering study to just take a look at all 3 tanks and help us prioritize funding and timing for the rehab of those. You know, whether a complete replacement of some of them might be the right way to go, and then timing over years, or just doing the rehab and repainting. That's something that's coming down the line that we're working. PFAS treatment designs, this is for the Greenland well. We're near completion of the preliminary design for the Greenland well. We're going with granular activated carbon there, as the levels are fairly low, and the rate of flow through there won't be that high. Obviously, a new building will be needed. This is the existing Greenland well. The building we need to house these 2 granular activated carbon filters is probably 5 times as big as that. But associated with this will be road upgrades, power upgrades, and all the things that we need to make this a workable treatment site. So we will be proceeding with the final design as soon as we finalize the preliminary, working with Greenland on that as well. And this is for the Portsmouth Collins well. I don't have a pretty picture of this, but similar. Weston Sampson is doing this design and their completion of the preliminary plan for that. It'll be a much larger facility than the Greenland facility because it's taking water from both Portsmouth and Collins well. They'll both be routed into the same site for treatment, but we are going with carbon on that as well. So once we get those finalized preliminary designs and cost estimate for the final design and construction for that, we will be forwarding that over to the Air Force since the contamination of the Portsmouth column, as well as associated with the southern plume from Pease Air Base. And then, not going into a lot of detail, I wanted to put the other projects that we have going on up here. I'm not going to get into these, but we have a lot. Little Bay Road water main replacement that went out to bid this week. That's a 1 mile of water main in Newington that will hopefully be replaced before winter. Then just a number of other projects, service line inventory. Mason will touch on that a little bit in his presentation. Seacoast reliability project, water system energy audit, free audit from DES. That's starting in a couple of weeks here. So number of projects. And I can answer questions about that. Or should we let's keep moving through. I'll move it over to Mason. Mason, do his part.
Save the best for last.
There you go. Get 2 minutes.
Yep, appreciate it. So yeah, this is gonna look familiar to some people here. We're gonna zoom out from the source water protection side, project side of the conversation into the distribution side of the system. So just to touch on the talking points, I'm just gonna kind of give updates on the free lead testing opportunity that we rolled out in October of last year. Talk about the results relating to that, the lead and copper role a little bit as an overarching view, and the service line inventory that falls under that, which is due in a month and 6 days from So yes, the free lead testing opportunity is going well, not as well as we had originally hoped. On the front of just the amount of people that reached out to me and wanted to participate, there were 55 total people, but only 27 have submitted their samples so far. And that's with 2 rounds of reminder emails to those same customers. So the results of that data that came back is pretty significant in terms of the the level of lead within the drinking water coming from the taps. It's basically the bathroom taps have the highest elevated concentrations of lead, and that's directly linked to the fixtures themselves. It has nothing to do with the service lines at these properties. These are all copper lines. So all of the other think blues on the bottom left, where there's no bars in the graph, those are all non-detect samples. And the 10 part per billion is I put as the peak, just because that's the action level that the state will have set soon. Majority of them came from first floor kitchen taps, and the effective forms of outreach, the newspaper was the best. So now we're going to switch over to the service line inventory side of things, away from the free lead testing. Just to break down the timeline of where we started and where we're at now, being a month out. So in February is when we initially launched this whole effort to identify and visually inspect as many service lines as we possibly could. On the private side, we originally started with 1,718 unknown materials relating to that. In May, we started our potholing efforts to identify unknowns on the city side, which takes quite a bit of effort, money as well. So pushing forward to now, we've had quite a bit of success with our private side inspections. We've exhausted all our outreach and the scheduled identifications that we could possibly get. We're still working with Zone 5, which I'll show you the map of the areas that we've targeted throughout Portsmouth. But since February of this year, we've identified 1,096 services since then. We have ongoing efforts to receive SRF funding from the state and to both help complete the inventory process, which isn't required right away. We don't have to have 100% known throughout our system, but it is going to come with time that it's required in 10 years that we reach that point. So the inventory updates by zone in terms of some data that we collected throughout this process. Zone 1 and Zone 2 really cover the downtown areas of Portsmouth. We had a lot of success with these two zones, to the point where Zone 1 only had 80 unknowns left over and 105 for Zone 2. but you can see that the majority of them are identified as copper. These are also the two zones that have the most galvanized detected within them as well, which is in purple on the pie chart. So pushing to zone 3 and zone 4, these are still within town, but kind of on the outskirts of downtown. Not as much success with these in terms of responses to our outreach efforts. We have 147 unknowns left in zone 3 and 129 in zone 4. And zone 5 are the surrounding towns that we serve. Pretty much the rest of the service connections that aren't quite within Portsmouth. And there's about 158 left over that we have to identify, but that's still ongoing. So now this is really the biggest picture that everyone should care about at this point. So this is the view as a whole. We have 8,382 service connections throughout our system. Actually, it's between the Portsmouth and the Peace system, so they're combined there. And out of those, 80% of them are copper. We have 7% left to identify. Only 2% of them are galvanized, and there's no lead throughout the system so far. So yes, with that, I guess we can push forward. There's 139 total galvanized services that we've found so far, which is going to require us to reach out to them individually and let them know about that. It will come time where they need to be replaced. There are some water quality issues associated with galvanized lines, and they're reaching the end of their lifespan and cause a lot of issues to the homeowner in terms of leaks and having to deal with that in an emergency state. So the next steps, like I said, October 16th is when the baseline inventory is due. We have to begin with public notices to all the lead service line, which there aren't any, which is good, but the galvanized requiring replacement and unknown service locations. We are revamping and have to correct our whole sample site selection process for the lead and copper rule by January 31st of next year. So we're actively working on that now. Looking long term, the lead action limit is going to reduce from 15 parts per billion, which is where it's at now, to 10, starting 3 years from now, in 2027. And we must verify and identify 100% of these unknown service line materials by 2037. And this is just, simply because of the promulgation of the rule, and that being finalized. That's how much time we have. And we must replace 100% of the galvanized by 2037 as well. And to just wrap this up, we have just recently completed our Q3 lead and copper rule compliance sampling, and this is the data associated with that. I think I showed this last SWAG meeting, if not 2 SWAG meetings ago, dating back to 2003, but this top row here is what we want to look at for this quarter. We collected 30 samples throughout the Portsmouth water system, and 90% of those samples were pretty much non-detect, if not at 1 part per billion. I guess I'll say they were 90% was non-detect, which is below 1. So this really just speaks to kind of our corrosion control practices with treatment over time. We put that treatment online around 2006, if not 2005. So you can see here, with this data in the 90th percentile, the concentration of lead found throughout the distribution system is diminished over time, which is a very good sign. And another thing to look at is just the amount of samples that we're required to collect every year. Sometimes you'll see that it's doubled here. Last year, we had to sample 2 different rounds at, each half of the year, 60 samples throughout the Portsmouth water system. And that was because a news source went online and, you know, ties right into this whole conversation of erosion control practice. There's more to that, but I guess I'll leave it at that. It's just a good sign with this whole conversation of lead.
And next year too, we have to sample 60 samples because of
Yes.
the rule goes into effect, so.
Yeah.
Next year, we'll be looking for a lot more sample size.
About anything, I guess.
Open it up to any questions.
Thank you guys for the tour. I gotta run, unfortunately, I gotta pick up my niece, but I just wanna thank you, yeah, this was really nice to see it in person.
Anytime. Thanks for coming.
And, yeah, but we're sitting on top of the cyanotoxins and I guess my only question would be the cyanobacteria, does it always produce cyanotoxins?
No, and I believe that's why the 70,000 cells per milliliter cell count is set in place for recreation, but no, they don't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Yeah.
coming.
Anytime.
I have a couple questions, as you're going through it, which one of these, I think it was 26, air filtration.
Air valves.
As you're doing that, is there any idea that you might like go into the pipes more and see if there's anything else within? Like, if you're gonna be digging up and doing all that, like, is there an idea that there could be more that comes of doing all of that for those replacements?
Maybe. We'll have access to the transmission main. That's one big goal of that project will be make sure we have access. There are places along the transmission main where there are old valves and old blow offs and things like that. We'll want to make sure we inventory those and make sure they're not leaking. Other than that, probably not. The ARVs are the important component to that.
And then as far as the lead test.
Air release valve.
So yeah,
Yeah, air release cells, sorry. And then as far as the lead testing around the zones that are, you know, you're still missing points in. Obviously you come to a public notice standpoint, but is there any idea of like door knocking to get into some of those areas?
Yes, yeah, so that's what we started doing in February of this year.
Okay.
We conjured up this whole plan to have, you know, this isn't just an individual effort, this is like.
Yeah, no, I
across
just,
the
I didn't know if you, yeah. I didn't know.
Yeah, but mostly a lot of the heavy lifting was done on the meter crew side.
Oh, okay.
Because they're out there changing out meters anyway. So yeah, with that, they were going door to door, they were leaving door tags for people that they couldn't get a hold of right away. And basically leaving 4 over each.
Oh, wow.
We would do it over the course of a month, so first week, we'd go around, go door to door, knock as many doors as we possibly could. They didn't answer, leave the tag. Next week, do the same thing for those who haven't responded. And we did that throughout each zone, each month.
So you really only need like one house on a block or something to get to understand the lines or?
No, not necessarily.
Okay,
every single line to every single house.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's an EPA requirement.
okay,
We need to visually see it.
okay,
So that's what makes this effort so tough, is that, yes, we do have records, yes, we have time cards. If they're not dated properly, if they're not written up properly, then we have to go back to the drawing board and see it visually, take pictures. Yeah, and so,
And part of this whole process too was self-identification. People could go identify their own lines and go into the online and enter information too and enter pictures. I don't know how many actually ended up doing that, but there's another way.
a decent amount, yeah, but some of them weren't acceptable because the picture was not correct. They took a picture of something else, or it wasn't in the right spot.
My water heater.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
State lines.
And you get some interesting calls throughout the whole process, but it's good, it's been really well so far, you know, just having 630 left out of the 8,008 and 8,300.
That's pretty impressive.
That's, yeah,
Great.
yeah. So.
I have a few questions. Because there's no regulations on cyanotoxins, would you have to notify residents if it does end up in the drinking water?
Yes, but
Yeah, I don't think that there's no have to, but we would. I mean, we'd be working with the state with that. They already have notification letters sort of scripted for that. So we work with them.
and that's when we have a certain level of, for our cell count, pre even learning about cyanotoxins, if we have a bloom that's at the recreation limit. That's what we notified.
And you mentioned that one of the options is to like skim it off the top. What do you do with it after you skim it? Where do you put it?
So one of the things we've looked into and we're still trying to decide on is pumping it over the dam. And of course, that goes into the river, but we think with flowing water, it should be okay and it'll eventually die off because it won't be able to accumulate. Still something we're looking into.
Okay. And then can animals like help transport it around, like
Well,
birds? Like
You mean by moving the
or
water?
you know, if they like land in the water and then it gets on their feet and then they go into another body of water, like are they a transmission to the?
I guess it depends really how much. Because it needs this excess of nutrients, so wherever it brings the cyanobacteria to would have to have sunlight, oxygen, phosphorus. You know, so
The right
it's
recipe.
like yeah, exactly, a perfect recipe maybe. If they eat it, they can release cyanotoxins too,
Okay.
and it's harmful to them.
It's pretty ubiquitous stuff. Need the right ecology and water system to support it.
This question's for Al. Has the Air Force officially committed to paying for the ports within Collins Well? Because at our RAB meeting in August, I recall them saying that they were still awaiting policy for OSD. So I know I'm so happy the city's moving forward and getting all that stuff in place, but I didn't know if you had received official word that they were gonna reimburse yet. Okay. I think that's it for all my questions. I don't know if anybody else has any. Go ahead, Jim.
I just have a couple, it's for Al, about a year ago, the planning board approved the Lonza expansion. And, those buildings are pretty much complete now. And at the time, they didn't know, or they weren't willing to say how much water, additional water they're gonna use there. Has Portsmouth been informed of their water demand for the new buildings?
I personally have not. I know we've been talking to them about doing some fire flow tests for like instantaneous demand, like they need water to fight fire, so we'll be doing some flow tests pretty soon for that. But overall demands, no, not aware.
I think right now, using 350,000 gallons a day. Which I think, if I'm wrong, it's about 60%. One user uses 60% of the water in each system. So it's just, I didn't know if that was gonna double with new buildings or. That's why the planning board was concerned that we weren't given that information. So.
They haven't gone above the 350, and actually their water use has gone down. They're using clean in place products more, and their internal policies are to cut back on water use. So they're telling us that they're not gonna need more water.
Okay. So it's good. And I guess last question is, do you expect the bid for the third water main across Little Bend to go out this winter or this fall?
It depends on the wetlands permit. And
All right, so it's a possibility.
any day, yeah, no, it would be nice to get it out to bid this winter.
Yeah.
So we would know to see if we can move ahead the following year, because there's a
Okay.
time frame. It can only happen during the winter
All right.
months, so.
So earliest would happen would be winter of 25, 26.
Yeah,
All right, thanks.
The one nice thing that, as a result of the work that was done by the valve insertions, we were able to test the lines and show that you operate on one line without having a major head impact. So that gave us some level of confidence. We also had coupons from the mains that showed the mains were in really good shape. So
there's one right out there, so.
yeah, so that, you know, we're calling this more sustainability resilience, you know, it's planning, making sure we're ready to address it. We're hoping the bids come in reasonably, but based on some of the requirements for turbidity control, we don't think it's gonna come down to the point of what with the monies we have, so.
It's a matter of
We'll have
assessment.
to make a
Where's the
decision
money
at that
to
time.
spend?
All right. That's good. The two mains are in good shape then.
Yeah, that was encouraging.
You don't have any one-on-one? No. Okay. And I think if there's no more questions, we can If there's public comment, Shan, I know you're. Public. Anybody?
But I mean, no comment.
Okay.
That's what I mean.
Is there anybody online? I mean, I saw one. No.
So we can go ahead and conclude.
Oh, yes.
It's a motion that we adjourn.
Sounds great. Everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.